Ava stared out at the skyline of New York from her office, the city stretching endlessly beyond the tall glass window. She felt the familiar rush of pride, thinking about the years she spent building Lumiere & Co., brick by brick, into a well-known luxury brand that stood for more than just elegance. It was supposed to be a place where anyone, no matter their background, could feel valued. But her pride was suddenly mixed with anxiety as she reread the letter on her desk, a detailed complaint about discrimination within her own company. The words hit her harder than she expected, shaking her confidence in everything she thought she had built. As she dug deeper into the claims, Ava's frustration turned to anger. It was starting to look like what she'd hoped was just a misunderstanding could actually be a sign of something bigger and far more serious. She kept thinking about her ideals, her late-night promises that Lumiere & Co. would always be different, inclusive, a safe space. Now those promises were being challenged right at the core. Realizing she couldn't just sit back and hope the problem would solve itself, Ava made up her mind. No matter how uncomfortable or risky this turned out to be, she knew she had to address it head-on, even if it meant taking a hard look at what her own company had become. Determined to get to the bottom of things, Ava called in her trusted assistant, Marcus. She quietly explained her plan. He was to arrange a last-minute trip to Chicago, the city where the complaint had come from. Ava emphasized that none of the regional managers or local staff should suspect anything, and Marcus understood without question. They both knew that official reports could easily be polished or misleading. If she wanted the real story, Ava needed to see with her own eyes how people were treated when no one knew who she was. The preparation for the trip was discreet. Marcus booked a regular seat for her under a different name and gave her the details in a plain envelope. During the flight, Ava sat alone by the window, watching the clouds drift by. Her mind bounced between memories of everything she'd fought for. Late nights, tough calls, moments when she almost gave up, and the nervousness of what she might discover. She wondered if the company had strayed so far without her noticing. She made a decision then. She would enter the store not as the CEO of Lumiere & Co., but as an ordinary customer, blending into the crowd. No title, no security, just herself, ready to see how things really worked in her absence. When Ava finally arrived at the Lumiere & Co. showroom in downtown Chicago, she was struck by the atmosphere the moment she walked in. The place sparkled with marble floors and shining display cases, every surface spotless and polished. But there was also a chill in the air that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Ava had dressed purposefully for the occasion. Simple: jeans, a navy sweater, and an old pair of sneakers. There was nothing about her outfit that hinted at who she really was or the success she'd built. She took her time, glancing over handbags and jewelry pieces, pretending to be just another window shopper. The staff, instead of greeting her with the warm welcome Lumiere & Co. was known for in training manuals, barely looked her way. A sales associate walked past, avoiding eye contact. It was the manager, Gregory, who sized her up the longest. His eyes flicked up and down in a quick judgment. She could almost feel his thoughts, as if he had already decided she was not worth his time, based solely on her appearance. Despite the awkwardness settling over her, Ava kept her composure. She knew she had to experience all of this herself, without letting on who she really was. She kept watching, determined to learn exactly how guests were truly treated here, and quietly took mental notes on every exchange she witnessed. After spending a few minutes blending in, Ava calmly approached the front desk and asked to see the showroom's most exclusive model, the kind of car that was always promoted as the pride of Lumiere & Co. Gregory, the manager, looked her up and down once again, before replying in a practiced tone that the model was reserved and unavailable for display. She felt a stinging disappointment, but thanked him and walked to a corner to sit and watch. It did not take long for Ava to see a clear pattern. A group of well-dressed customers, mostly older white men in tailored suits, were greeted immediately, offered glasses of chilled champagne, and escorted to the high-end displays. She watched as a young black couple was barely acknowledged and subtly nudged toward the entry-level cars. Another woman who looked Latino received a quick, impersonal response when she asked about financing options, then was left standing alone. From her seat invisible to most, Ava felt sadness blend with anger deep inside. What bothered her most was how casual the exclusion seemed. No big gestures, just a steady stream of dismissals and small, cold shoulders. It dawned on her that these weren't one-off mistakes, but signs of a system that quietly judged and excluded, right under everyone's noses. It was something she'd never wanted for her company, and yet here it was, happening openly. After sitting unnoticed for almost an hour, Ava rose from her chair and quietly left the Lumiere & Koba showroom. No one tried to stop her or even seemed to notice she was leaving, which only confirmed what she already suspected. The problem went deeper than a few rude staff members. Stepping outside into the brisk Chicago air, she felt the weight of what she had witnessed settle in her chest. She made her way down the street to a small local cafe and ordered a black coffee. Choosing a spot by the window, Ava remained mostly hidden from view, but had a clear line of sight back toward the showroom entrance. As she sipped her coffee, she watched the steady flow of people, customers of every background coming and going, employees greeting some with enthusiasm and ignoring others completely. From this quiet distance, it was even easier to spot the patterns the staff followed, the way subtle gestures and decisions added up to something much bigger. In that moment, Ava realized that the issue was far bigger than just one location or a single manager. Changing a few faces would not be enough. The real challenge lay in breaking down old habits and rewriting the rules by which the whole company operated. Though the task felt enormous, Ava knew she could not turn back now. Inside the showroom, Ava noticed someone who stood out, not because she took center stage, but because she actually looked a bit uneasy. Her name tag read Jasmine. Jasmine was young, with curly hair pulled back in a ponytail, and she moved through the room with a hint of hesitation. What caught Ava's attention was not what Jasmine did, but how she seemed uncomfortable whenever Gregory gave instructions that clearly favored certain customers. Ava watched closely as Jasmine paused before following these directions, her eyes lingering on the customers who were brushed off too quickly. A little while later, a woman of color approached the counter and politely asked about a model on display. Jasmine stepped forward with a warm smile, ready to help, but Gregory appeared out of nowhere. With a tight smile and dismissive tone, he told Jasmine to go assist another section, steering both her and the customer away from anything exclusive. Though Jasmine obeyed, there was a quiet tension in the way she glanced back, as if she knew in her gut the situation was wrong. This brief moment, barely noticed by anyone else, did not escape Ava. She recognized something of her own younger self in Jasmine's hesitation and small acts of kindness. In Jasmine, she saw the possibility of an ally within the company, someone who understood the problem and did not just look away. After observing Jasmine's quiet resistance, Ava decided to approach her. She waited for a moment when Gregory was across the room, then walked over casually and lowered her voice. "Excuse me," she said. "I would really like to see that exclusive model if possible." Jasmine froze for a second, her hands twisting anxiously. The conflict on her face was easy to read. She glanced around, knowing the request went against the unspoken rules Gregory enforced. Ava caught her eye and spoke gently. "You do not have to pretend you do not see what is happening here. Sometimes the right thing is not always the easy thing." Jasmine hesitated, as if struggling to decide whether it was safe to take that risk. She looked down at her shoes, clearly torn. Before Jasmine could respond, Gregory approached with his usual forced smile, interrupting. "I am sorry." "Ma'am," he said loudly, "the car you are asking about is only available to certain clients. Perhaps you would prefer to look at something else." His tone made it clear that the policy was not going to change. Ava didn't push further. Instead, she pressed a business card into Jasmine's palm as she turned to leave. "If you ever want to talk, give me a call," she said quietly. With that small gesture, Ava hoped she had planted the idea that change was possible, even if it started with just one conversation. As the workday came to a close and customers trickled out, Jasmine stayed behind to tidy the displays. She found herself staring at the business card Ava had slipped into her hand. Her fingers fumbled with it, and she realized they were shaking just a little. All day, she had played along with things she knew in her heart were wrong. She remembered the uncomfortable looks, the moments she could not bring herself to meet, a customer's eyes, and the orders she followed just to keep the peace, and her job. A wave of shame washed over her, mixed with worry about what would happen if Gregory or anyone else found out, but holding that little card made something inside her shift. It was as if someone had finally seen her struggle and offered a way out, or at least a place to talk about it. Jasmine weighed the risks, losing her paycheck, having her co-workers turn against her, but realized she could not ignore her conscience anymore. With a quiet resolve, she pulled out her phone, dialed Ava's number, and asked if they could meet somewhere private. They agreed on a small coffee shop around the corner, one where the world might start to feel just a bit more honest. That single call was the first real push against the silence she had been part of for far too long. Inside the quiet coffee shop, Jasmine sat across from Ava, nervous but determined. After a few hushed moments with their mugs, Jasmine finally spoke up. She explained that what Ava had seen at Lumiere & Co. was not just a few bad choices by individuals, but something much deeper. Those unfair rules and routines. They weren't written anywhere, but everyone learned them fast, mostly through hints and warnings from managers like Gregory. If anyone tried to treat all customers equally or question why certain people were ignored, there were quick consequences. Sometimes you got called out or made to work the worst shifts, and sometimes there were even threats about losing your job. Jasmine admitted she had already gotten into trouble once for trying to help someone who was openly being disrespected. Since then, she had been scared to speak up again, always walking a thin line between doing the right thing and keeping her paycheck. Ava listened without interrupting, quietly soaking it all in. She realized just how strong the grip of fear and pressure was in that place, and how a system could keep itself going by making everyone too afraid to fight it. Gently, Ava told Jasmine that she could be her eyes and ears within the company if she chose to, but made it clear the decision was always hers. Ava would never ask her to risk more than she was ready for. What mattered was that Jasmine knew she had support, whatever path she decided to take next. Later that night, back in her hotel room overlooking downtown Chicago, Ava paced by the window, sorting through everything Jasmine had shared with her. The anger she felt earlier had shifted. Now, it was fueling her determination to dismantle this broken system, not just call out a single manager. She realized that confronting Gregory alone would never be enough. She needed solid proof, the kind that could not be denied or brushed aside by anyone at Lumiere & Co. Only with that could she hope to force the higher-ups to actually listen and do something real. Ava reached for her phone and called Mason, her longtime friend, and a fellow advocate who had helped her document cases like this before. Together, they started discussing how to really show what was happening inside those pristine showroom walls. They decided the fastest way to expose the problem was to create a real comparison. Mason would come in as a well-dressed white customer, asking for the same service and information Ava had been denied. If Mason's experience was completely different, it would be clear as day for anyone watching. Ava was careful as they built the plan, not wanting to put Jasmine at risk. The goal was to catch the bias on camera, make it obvious, and bring that evidence straight to corporate. Evidence so clear it could not be ignored or explained away. The plan played out exactly as Ava and Mason had hoped. Mason arrived at Lumiere & Co., dressed in a sharp grey suit, looking every bit the part of a serious buyer. The moment he walked into the showroom, Gregory's whole attitude changed. Smiling wide, Gregory greeted Mason and offered him a fancy bottled water. There wasn't even a hint of hesitation. Gregory led him straight to the exclusive car that Ava had just been told she could not see. Mason was encouraged to sit behind the wheel, ask questions, and even take brochures home. All of this happened while Ava watched from a quiet corner, her heart racing as she recorded the difference on her phone. Ava could hardly believe the contrast between what she had experienced and what Mason was getting now. It was all there. On video, Gregory openly showing one face to Mason while shutting Ava out only minutes before. If anyone doubted the existence of discrimination, these recordings would erase all doubt. For the first time since visiting the showroom, Ava felt a sense of justice within reach. But nerves crept in as she considered her next steps. Now came the hard part, finding the right moment and method to go public with these facts, all while making sure Jasmine would not suffer the fallout from their actions. Ava knew she could not just march into the company with her evidence and expect real change. Instead, she started with a careful move. She created a new email account and sent a message to the Lumiere & Co. board of directors late one evening. Attached was the video, alongside a short message warning that public exposure was only a step away and that the company's reputation was hanging by a thread. The tone was not angry or desperate. It was just clear. Ava's hope was to rattle the leadership enough that they would scramble to get ahead of the story, maybe even admit what was going on to avoid a larger crisis. As expected, the brewing storm behind closed doors reached Gregory quickly. Word started spreading throughout the showroom. Gregory grew tense and short-tempered, acting every bit the man with something to hide. In staff meetings, he barked orders and demanded everyone delete messages that might link them to shady decisions. He even tried to intimidate Jasmine, pulling her aside and warning that anyone who stepped out of line would be out of a job faster than they could clean out their locker. Jasmine could feel the noose tightening. Each day she arrived at work, she wondered if this would be the day her world changed for better or worse. The atmosphere inside Lumiere & Co. changed from tense to nearly unbearable. Gregory, desperate to save himself, started pointing fingers at anyone who looked nervous, clearly searching for someone to blame for the leaked video. Rumors swirled in hushed conversations near the coffee machine, and employees started watching every word they said, wondering if they would be the next target. It did not take long for Gregory to call Jasmine into his office. He grilled her with questions, hinting that he knew about her meeting outside work and pressing her to confess any knowledge about the leak. Jasmine kept her expression steady, and her answers simple, denying any involvement and refusing to let her fear show. Inside, she was terrified, but she told herself that breaking down would only feed Gregory's suspicion. Later that day, Jasmine slipped into a back hallway and called Ava, her voice barely more than a whisper. Ava repeated what she had said. Before, Jasmine should not admit to anything, and under no circumstances should she let Gregory scare her into saying or signing something untrue. Ava reminded her that support was ready for her, no matter what. They both understood that the tension could not keep building like this. The next step, whatever it might be, would determine everything for them and for everyone stuck in that toxic workplace. Digging deeper, Ava began to realize that Gregory's power did not come from his charisma or from working there for years. She stumbled across a series of internal memos and emails, some sent late at night and full of vague, formal corporate language, that made it clear an executive much higher up in the Lumiere-encumbered chain was backing him. This person, a senior vice president named William Reed, had approved most of Gregory's hiring decisions and handled complaints about the showroom quietly, making them disappear before they ever reached the board. It hit Ava that the problem ran through more than just one store manager. It wove through the very structure that held the company together. Gregory was protected because he was part of a group that looked out for one another, making sure nothing ever changed. The more Ava thought about it, the clearer it became. There was no way she could bring this down from the inside without outside help. The company was too practiced at covering its tracks, so Ava decided she had to bring this story out into the open. She reached out to a reporter she trusted, Natalie Franklin at the Chicago Tribune, someone who had covered issues like this before. With the video, emails, and Jasmine's story, Ava was determined to make sure the truth reached every corner, no matter how many powerful people tried to keep it buried. As Ava started working with Natalie from the Tribune, word got around in the upper floors of Lumiere & Co. that a major story was brewing. Gregory and his supporters on the board, fearing exposure, quickly switched from defense to attack. Suddenly, social media was full of rumors about Ava. Anonymous posts claimed she was hungry for power and willing to tear down anyone in her way. Some blogs even suggested that she was blowing things out of proportion just to get noticed. It was obvious the stories were planted, meant to muddy the waters and cast doubt on her character. Grumbling from seasoned investors and a few board members reached Ava's inbox every morning. They wanted answers, nervous about the company's image and what it might mean for their shares. Ava felt the weight almost everywhere. At meetings, folks seemed to avoid eye contact or shot her skeptical looks, clearly wondering if she had gone too far. Each time she thought she had a handle on things, some slick news segment or whispered conversation undermined her message. She realized she could not win this battle by playing it safe or just hoping the truth would speak for itself. If she wanted real justice and wasn't willing to leave Jasmine out to dry, Ava knew it was time for something bigger. A bold plan that would cut through all the noise and force people to finally care about what was actually happening. The breakthrough came out of nowhere for most people, but for Ava and Jasmine, it had been building for weeks. Watching Ava refuse to back down gave Jasmine the push she needed. Worried but determined, she met with Natalie from the Tribune after work one evening, sliding a folder full of printed emails, personal notes, and a timeline of everything she had witnessed right across the diner table. Jasmine also agreed to speak on the record, her voice shaking a little as she described the daily pressure, the threats, and the way customers and employees were treated differently based on who vouched for them. Natalie listened, took notes, and promised her story would not be buried. When the story was published, it hit Chicago harder than anyone expected. Within hours, it was everywhere, splashing across major news sites, trending on Twitter, and filling morning talk shows the next day. Suddenly, everyone was talking about Lumiere & Co.'s toxic culture instead of gossip about Ava's ambition. Gregory landed right in the spotlight, accused by name and called in for comment. The narrative flipped. Ava's inbox filled with support, and employees from across the region reached out to share their own stories. With public outrage growing fast, the board realized they could not keep a lid on things much longer. With the whole city buzzing about the scandal, Lumiere & Co.'s board had no choice but to schedule an emergency meeting on a Wednesday morning. The mood in the conference room was thick with tension. Some of the board members tried to talk about how much the company meant to Chicago, about its history, and how it had always prided itself on service. But the focus quickly shifted to business. Everyone was worried about how much more damage this story could do. Someone mentioned that several key investors were already threatening to pull their money, and others pointed to a dip in foot traffic at the showrooms. Gregory, dressed in a suit that looked a little too perfect, did his best to dodge blame. He tried to argue that everything he did was just standard practice, claiming it was how every business stayed competitive. But Ava stood up with a stack of documents, reading out statements from customers who had walked out or felt mistreated, and sharing even more emails, pointing out the same problems over and over. It became impossible to argue. After a heated back and forth, with the public and shareholders watching closely, the board reached a breaking point. They took a vote, and the result was clear. Gregory was fired on the spot, his badge and company laptop collected before he could even leave the room. The news of Gregory's firing spread like wildfire. It was front-page material for days, not just in the business section, but across almost every outlet in Chicago. National channels even brought up his fall as a rare case of someone at the E-Day top actually facing real consequences in the luxury retail world. Whenever Gregory's name came up, people spoke about accountability, something they had not seen much of in the industry. Overnight, invitations started to dry up. Former friends from the board did not respond to his calls, and even LinkedIn connections quietly disappeared. He walked through downtown with his head down, realizing that he had burned bridges for good. No one wanted their reputation tied to his. On the other side of things, Ava knew her work was just starting. Kicking Gregory out was a step, but she understood the problem ran deeper than just one manager. She started reaching out to department heads and store managers, talking openly about what would change. When the press called for comment, Ava invited them to a conference at the downtown flagship store. In front of cameras and reporters, she laid out a new plan: real changes to policy, an independent complaint hotline, and public reporting of diversity and fairness numbers. This time, she wanted everyone to know that Lumiere & Co. was turning the page for good. During the press conference, Ava stepped onto the little makeshift stage in front of the store's entrance, the lake breeze ruffling her notes. Reporters waited, notebooks out, camera lights blinking. She did not gloss over what had happened. Instead, Ava opened up about the company's mistakes, admitting that for too long, silence and bad habits had been allowed to stick around at Lumiere & Co. She explained how tough it was to face the truth, but stressed it was time to do things differently. Then she rolled out the new plan. Every employee, from the front desk to upper management, would go through new training. There would be a zero-tolerance policy on discrimination and a clear process for reporting problems that did not depend on connections. The company would put together an outside committee made up of community leaders, not just executives, to watch over complaints and see that real action would be taken. Ava promised the public would see regular reports on their progress. The room broke into applause, though Ava noticed a few tense faces in the crowd. Some people looked relieved, while others seemed worried or unsure about just how deep these changes would go. Not backing down, she turned to the cameras and called on other luxury brands in the United States to do the same. She wanted Lumiere & Co.'s turning point to become a standard, not a rare exception. A few days later, Jasmine officially stepped into her new role as head of culture and integrity at Lumiere & Co. Now it was her job to actually put all those promises into action. Her office buzzed with meetings, plans for training, and tough conversations with department heads who were nervous about changing old habits. Still, every time she walked the halls or led a team session, she remembered those first late nights talking to Ava, feeling like nobody would ever notice what was wrong or stand up for her. Now, she saw new faces every week. Employees and managers alike who seemed a little less afraid to speak up. Jasmine felt proud, but also more careful, knowing a lot of people would be looking at her to see what real change looked like. One evening, after a long day, Ava found herself standing by her office window, staring out at the city lights of Chicago. Everything felt different, but she knew that really, this was just the start. Getting rid of Gregory and laying out reforms was just one fight. There would always be people who preferred the old ways or thought these new guardrails were too much. But with Jasmine by her side, Ava felt ready. She hoped that what they did would ripple out, showing others that you never have to settle for things just because they have always been that way.